In about 48 hours from now, the UK will be voting to elect a new government. The trigger for the snap election was the Prime Minister's quest for a bigger majority to strengthen her hand in Brexit negotiations. But national security has now become the focus of this campaign. With fears of follow-up attacks, England is dealing with one of the most difficult periods, both for its natives and the large immigrant population. Muslim religious leaders have denounced the attack and denied funeral prayers to the attackers. In a bid to show their religion does not support terror, neither do they. On Gravitas tonight, we ask if that will be enough to heal a country that has been struck thrice in 3 months. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. The headlines first. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping could meet in Astana on the sidelines of the SCO summit later this week. The meeting likely to address recent irritants in the relationship like the One Belt, One Road and India's entry into the NSG. Paris is on tenterhooks again. A man who reportedly attacked armed agents with a hammer has been shot at outside the Notre Dame Cathedral. In a war of tweets with the US President Donald Trump, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan says that the invitation to Trump should be scrapped, says the US President is not worthy of a state visit. And as the death toll from last week's truck bombing crosses 150, Afghan President Abdul Ghani issues an ultimatum to the Taliban, warning them to embrace peace or face consequences. Also on the show, some specials lined up for you as always. Pakistan is more a threat than an ally for America, says a top think tank in Washington. The question we are asking, will the US drop its hypocrisy over Pakistan now? And Muslim leaders shunning the London attackers, denying them funeral prayers, saying that their acts are against Islam. We'll talk about that with our special guest from London this evening. The change of guard in Nepal. What does Sher Bahadur Deoba's prime ministership mean for the country and its neighbours? We'll bring you a ground report from Kathmandu this evening on Gravitas. But first, to news that is developing, and this is coming out of France. There is a security alert near the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. According to reports coming in, French police opened fire after a man tried to attack a law enforcement officer near the cathedral. Local government has advised residents to avoid the area. Reports coming in that Paris police have completed the operation and more details are awaited. And my colleague Mandy Clark joining us on the phone line. Mandy, what have you picked up on the ground?
Well, what we understand is someone tried to attack one police officer with a hammer, and a fellow police officer immediately shot at the attacker, and the police have said he has been neutralized. So it's unclear if he is still alive, but what it means is he was certainly, the attack was immediately stopped. And now that attacker has gone to hospital. This attack is very similar to attack that was just months ago at the Louvre, which is another iconic site in Paris, the famous museum, where a knifeman tried to stab a police officer. So we're seeing very similar low-grade attacks on the security service in police. We understand that people are currently still in Notre Dame Cathedral. It was immediately locked down, and all the worshippers in the church were left in the church until a security clearance had taken place. That security clearance has finished now, but they're still in the church. So very much a very active scene. And France, as we know, has been on a heightened state of security alert since 2015.
And just like the UK, France has seen some terror threats, some attacks as well, and is also going into election later this month, the parliamentary election.
Absolutely, yes. France has seen a number of horrific attacks over the past few years. What stands out is last July, nearly a year ago, was that terrible truck attack that killed 85 people on Bastille Day. So certainly France has known its terror attacks. There has been a number of small sporadic ones, and of course right before the French presidential elections, a couple of days before, another security officer was killed outside the Champs-Élysées. So certainly France is under constant threat, and it is one of the cases where France is a strong ally to the UK, and both have the same issue. The question of how to combat it is one for both countries.
Absolutely. The Paris police saying that the operation is over for now. They're not calling it a terror attack just yet. Mandy Clark, we'll leave it at that for the moment and wait for more details to come in on the developing situation in Paris. These are the latest visuals that we have for you. The area virtually under lockdown there, with the police saying that the operation is over, and the people who were visiting are still inside the cathedral, we understand, and locals have been told to avoid this area. Now, 6 hours ago, something quite significant unfolded at the United Nations. The Trump administration's voice at the UN, Nikki Haley, threatened to pull out of the Human Rights Council if its writ, that is protecting its ally Israel, was not implemented. Instead, it wanted the 47-member council to punish Venezuela, the Latin American country, which is a member of the UN Human Rights Council, a country that has routinely allowed UNHRC teams to visit, even facilitated teams of international observers to examine its record when found wanting. It has also promised and implemented reforms. This is Nikki Haley earlier today.
I'm proud that the United States is hosting a side event on the rapidly deteriorating human rights situation in Venezuela today. I'll be there, and I hope you'll be with me to hear firsthand about the serious human rights violations there. The Council must address this issue. If Venezuela cannot, it should voluntarily step down from its seat on the Human Rights Council until it can get its own house in order.
Nikki Haley was speaking at the forum 24 hours after she told India that the US does not require advice on climate change. Trump's UN choice reflects a new American agenda to undermine multilateral agencies that can stand up to its unipolar vision of the world, where being right essentially depends on which side of the US, of the us versus them divide you're on. Has Trump's White House made the United Nations redundant? Is it time to democratize multilateral organizations to ensure that they reflect a changed world? That's the question we're asking. With us in the studio is a very special guest, the ambassador of Venezuela to India, Augusto Montiel. Thank you very much for being with us here this evening, Ambassador. My question to you is what I just posed to our viewers. Has America under Donald Trump made the United Nations and all that it stands for redundant?
Well, thank you very much. Good evening. Good evening to all. The United Nations is the essence nowadays in the 21st century of civilization. Mankind has had wars, devastation, advance, development, and the United Nations principles and the United Nations Charter is an institution that must be defended, that must be protected. And we cannot just come and kick the table or kick the lamp because we don't like it. There is the evidence that the United Nations system, in all respects, in education, in health, in housing, in food, in every respect, in human rights, has come to construct a system of measurements, of evaluations that can allow for all countries to come together and advance together with a measure of a reference. So under the present administration, we have heard, this is not my words, we have heard the President of the United States, and we have heard several of the agencies of the United States referring to the United Nations in a rather negative manner. I don't see, the world cannot see how then we can function without.
What do you mean when you say negative manner? They don't take it seriously? They think they own the system?
Apparently, from your question and from what the ambassador of the United States to the United Nations in Geneva has pointed out, is that they don't like the decisions at the Council of Human Rights. And for example, Venezuela has been voted. The last two occasions in which Venezuela has been voted to be a member of the Council of Human Rights is precisely because of the record of human rights advance and defense in Venezuela in all aspects.
So how do you feel when you're compared to Israel on human rights record?
Well, Venezuela is top in United Nations. Venezuela is top in Human Development Index. Venezuela is top in by the way, Venezuela last week on Thursday, the 31st of May, was elected again at the United Nations with 133 votes to preside the Committee of Decolonization. So in human rights, in the respect of human rights in every sense.
Why is Venezuela being targeted by the US?
Because Venezuela has oil. Yeah. Because Venezuela is the largest reserve of oil in the world. And we have been listening to news, to information, not news.
Yeah, I'm very curious. You're sitting with a lot of pictures and I want to know what they're about.
There's been a campaign to destabilize Venezuela. There's been a campaign because there is a desire to change the government of Venezuela in an illegal way, in an unconstitutional way, in a violent and criminal way.
At the behest of America.
And there are agencies which finance non-governmental organizations, which everybody knows. It happens in many countries. It happens also in countries here in Asia.
Who is orchestrating this campaign?
Sorry?
Who is orchestrating this campaign?
Who is orchestrating this? The North American state, because there are very clear, for example, the United States has sanctioned 8 members of the Supreme Court in Venezuela. They have sanctioned the Vice President of Venezuela. They have created, they approved in Obama government, and now in this present government they have restated
but
that.
There's a difference. Because
a decree declaring Venezuela, listen to this, declaring Venezuela an extraordinary military threat to the security of the United States. Can you imagine this? Why did they did the same before the invasion in Iraq? They did the same before many other situations. But always when they attack countries with wealth, with mineral resources. In this case, oil. So they're trying to create this sensation that Venezuela is a rogue state, and Venezuela is a state with a constitution that is respected, and the opposition in Venezuela, the violent opposition in Venezuela, the opposition that is and has been the same, the opposition right now.
Talking about protests against President Maduro.
This opposition was the same opposition responsible for the coup d'etat that kidnapped President Chavez in 2002. The same opposition that did not approve the constitution referendum in the year 99. The same opposition that has in the year 2008, in the year 2013.
How big is this opposition?
The opposition at the moment, they had a victory in the parliamentary elections in December 2015. They obtained almost 2/3 of the National Assembly. So how can they say that this is not a democracy? Venezuela is the most vibrant and clear democracy in the whole of the American continent. And certainly our examples have been followed by many countries. And in Venezuela, we have elections that have not been recognized by the opposition. But we recognize the government of President Maduro. I, of course, represent the people of Venezuela. And we have to approve every election that takes place. So right now there is an election there's a National Constitutional Assembly which has been called for, according to the Constitution, in Article 348, which says the initiative for calling a National Constituent Assembly may emanate from the President of the Republic sitting with the Cabinet of Ministers. And also an election in December for regional governors and for assemblies, for regional assemblies. So they are trying, by the way, Venezuela was elected.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm being told that we're trying to balance it here. We want to hear from both the sides. And I understand the point you're making. We have Stephen Golub joining us. He's an international affairs expert and with us, I understand, from California. Good evening, Stephen. Good to have you on the show. The Venezuelan ambassador here is telling me and telling our audience that that their country is being unfairly targeted by the U.S. The latest attack coming from Nikki Haley as recently as earlier today or yesterday, according to some reports. And she says that if Israel is sanctioned, if there are actions against Israel, so should be against countries like Venezuela. And he says it's a sustained campaign because they want our oil.
Well, I half agree in a big way with the distinguished ambassador. I half disagree in a big way, and I'll explain why. And thank you very much for having me on your show. I half agree in that there has been a lot of hypocrisy in the U.S. stance on human rights over the years, not just the Trump administration. At the same time, there are times when the U.S. has stood up in a very valid and forthright way for democracy and human rights in many countries. The problem we have with the current Trump administration is that it's taken the elements of our foreign policy that are hypocritical a step further with its America First agenda, which really does, to get back to your initial lead into this discussion, does undermine the United Nations for all its faults. And the UN is flawed in some ways. It still is an important institution that's not redundant. The respect in which I disagree with the ambassador, with all due respect, is that there have been steps that have been documented by very, very reliable, credible groups such as Human Rights Watch, many other independent organizations and journalists, in which the government has undermined human rights by its treatment of the opposition, has undermined the rule of law. And to call Venezuela a paragon of human rights and democracy in Latin America, and the leading example of that in Latin America, is inaccurate and really does almost insult other countries such as Chile or Peru, which have had legitimate democratic elections, which are allowing their oppositions to operate freely. And I just don't think that's fair or accurate to characterize Venezuela that way. So agreeing and disagreeing with some of what he said and with some of what you're suggesting, but I think it's a complicated picture.
Fair enough. Ambassador, of course, I want you to respond to that. And I want to ask you, is it then time to look for alternatives when the U.S. says we want to pull out of this body? First, the Paris Accord. Now they don't want to be part of the Human Rights Council. Is it time to look at a new UN?
Every country in the world should respect the United Nations institutions and procedures. You cannot, at this moment, come to threaten in any way any country. No country should do it. On the contrary, we should pay humbly attention to the need for more politics, for more negotiations, for more dialogue, for more democratic attitudes. In Venezuela, we have supported always that the United Nations as a necessary, fundamental institution for the development and the continuation of life on the earth to become adapted to the new era. That's why multipolarity is necessary. That's why every region must have expressions to strengthen international institutions. That's why India, for example, as a leader in many respects, history would welcome, and certainly Venezuela has been there supporting the idea for India to become a member of a permanent member of the Security Council. The think-alike countries, and Venezuela, together with India, is one of them. India, by the way, has defended and protected the record of human rights protection in Venezuela every time there is this discussion. Last year, the speech by the Indian ambassador at Geneva was a piece, a historic piece, and Venezuela was one of the countries in the last two universal periodic exams on human rights. Venezuela, precisely because of the insistence of countries like the United States and other small number of countries, we have been under the magnifying glass. And so the examination is very acute and very precise. And Venezuela has been there with more than 95% approval from all countries. And last year, we were voted again with 133 votes.
95% approval. Was there a poll?
Approval, yeah, because every country presents proposals for every country to take in order to improve the record of human rights respect. And Venezuela, the same as India and any countries in Africa, Europe, every country goes under that analysis. And Venezuela has taken and implemented those. Now, what happens in Venezuela? What is happening right now in Venezuela, these very well planned and financed violent situations only happen in 7 municipalities of 335 that exist in Venezuela. 2 of them are in Caracas. And these images of extreme violence...
So you're saying the scale of the violence is very small, but it's being magnified.
Of course.
By whom? By the international press?
Yes, by corporate multinational press agencies that don't even present...
I'm going to request our camera to zoom in.
Yeah, they don't present, for example, on the 9th of May, there was a popular rejection of violence.
This is a rejection of violence.
Yes, they don't present these big rallies, these marches. They don't present them on international news. They don't present them, for example, our good friends from Reuters. We would invite anybody around the world, all your journalists from WION, from ZTV, from any chain of news around the world, to go to Venezuela and don't just get the news coming from corporate news agencies, because they have 2 problems. First, they are making invisible completely the thousands and millions of people who support in Venezuela peace and who support the government of President Maduro. These pictures do never get shown. This is on May Day, just a month ago. They don't present these massive demonstrations of support, and they don't present these pictures. Is this peaceful demonstrations, or is this pictures of very well-equipped, financed people who actually use violence to create destabilization?
Right.
And look at this.
Okay.
Look at this one. Burning.
Okay.
The burning of people. So what do we call? We call for the respect of the Constitution. In Venezuela, there are dates for elections. The next presidential election in Venezuela will take place in the next year, 2018. So they have to wait until the elections.
Okay.
The next election is the Constitutional Assembly at the end of July.
So you're saying Venezuela is being unfairly targeted.
Yes.
Stephen Golub, look at the messaging from America. Don't lecture us on climate change. Nikki Haley tells India, don't vote against our allies. Do not question American policies. How do you expect the world to react? How should the world react?
By decrying U.S. hypocrisy when the U.S. lectures some countries about human rights, but on the other hand, our President Trump has a very friendly conversation with the rather thuggish president of the Philippines, or endorses Saudi Arabia and, in effect, its policies, which are very much against human rights. the world is right to reject or to resent that. Having said that, and I don't want to seem like I'm a representative of the U.S. government here, or certainly not of the Venezuela opposition, I do think it's unfair to characterize what's going on in Venezuela as simply democracy in action. Many people, as evinced by some recent votes, have spoken out and voted against, if I may continue, please, have spoken out against the government. The government is taking steps to really undermine the rule of law regarding the Supreme Court, regarding steps it's taken against the opposition. So it's not a situation where, even though the U.S. may be hypocritical and wrong in some respects, that makes the Venezuelan government right. In this particular case, whatever else might be going on behind the scenes, Ambassador Haley was correct to decry the Venezuelan government's anti-human rights and anti-democracy steps, even though she represents a government and administration that has been wrong on those issues in many other respects.
Final comments, Ambassador.
Well, every effort must be made internationally so that things like 12 years ago, 14 years ago, this expression is now well known internationally, fake news. The fake news was that weapons of mass destruction were the reason to invade a country, to destroy a country.
Yes.
These steps that are taken are all against, Venezuela, are all against the principles of the United Nations, of non-interference, of non-intervention, of peaceful resolution of conflicts. The conflicts in Venezuela can be resolved by Venezuelans, and the Pope has been there calling the opposition to sit down and dialogue. Other ex-presidents in the region have been calling them to sit down. And listen, this is important. Last Thursday, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago gave a press conference, and he actually was calling for the resignation of the Secretary General of the United Nations for being responsible for some of the violence and for getting involved in the internal matters of Venezuela. We need a more democratic United Nations. We need that the United States and every country should sit down and respect every principle of the United Nations. We can live together. Oil must be used, like Venezuela uses oil, for cooperation, not for domination. Oil is there, and that's why India, which in fact we are the fourth exporter of oil to India, India will keep on receiving Venezuelan oil because oil is there so that all countries can live better, a better life, and cooperate together one with the other.
All right. Augusto Montiel, Ambassador of Venezuela to India. Thank you very much. Stephen Golub, appreciate you joining us on the show as well. The question still hangs, is it time to look for a more democratized United Nations, and which are the countries that can come in together? What does it mean for the US rather, to pull out of these fora? We're going to take a break with that. Still ahead on Gravitas, America's top think tanks calling a spade finally. Pakistan is more a threat than an ally, they say. Will their government pay heed?